Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our pre-conference podcast of Future Bridge. Today's pre-conference podcast series is dedicated to our event, which is Energy Transition and Emission Reduction for Metal and Mining Industry. This forum will happen 9 and 10 of June in Stockholm, Sweden. I have a great honor to welcome today's podcast guest. My virtual studio has a Director of Mining Business Development of Rockwell Automation, Hein Hiestermann. Hein, welcome. Hello.
Hi, Olga.
Well, Hein, we need to tell you that we are extremely happy and we would like to express our appreciation to Rockwell Automation for being our gold sponsor of the event. And we are excited to have you on our event as a speaker with the presentation. And we cannot wait to hear your expertise and knowledge that you're going to share with us and our attendees. But before we get started with main questions, I would really like to ask you to share a bit of your background, what you are doing and what's your expertise and what is your role in Rockwell Automation.
Thanks, Olga. I hope I can live up to your expectations at the conference. I started my career in mining in the late 80s in South Africa. I spent a lot of time working on gold mines, platinum mines, and coal mines, primarily, for a large mining corporation, which was probably the precursor of what BHP Billiton is now. And it was good. You know, the formative years in my career, I started out as an electrical engineer, but very quickly moved into the control system or control and instrumentation department, as I called it then. And I've really my whole career has been dedicated to instrumentation and control engineering in mining systems. After about 8 years of working as a consulting engineer in the mining industry for a mining company, I then started my own company as a systems integrator in mining. I then got acquired by Rockwell in 2011, and I've been working with Rockwell since 2011. As most of your listeners might know, Rockwell Automation is a pure automation company. Arguably, as a pure automation company, we can probably lay claim to being the largest, if not one of the largest. But as an automation company, our focus is absolutely on the core technologies and requirements that the future that is kind of upon us will bring. Energy transition, net zero, you know, the massive shortage of resources coming up. These are all issues that are very, very closely aligned with the need to be efficient and have optimized production. And I think this is where Rockwell, with its automation platforms and especially with the digital and software offering that we've got now, there's a tremendous role for us to play in the industry.
Great, thank you very much for your answer here. So you already started to mention about Rockwell Automation. Would you be able to share with us what's experience Rockwell Automation has in mining and in terms of zero emission, so transition to zero emission mining?
It's an interesting question. You know, obviously Rockwell is very deeply embedded in the mining industry all over the world. You know, if you go back to the early days of automation, you know, the first PLC. I mean, the name PLC is a Rockwell kind of, you know, an Allen Bradley. Allen Bradley is the PLC brand of Rockwell Automation, and you know, so we've been at the forefront of technology application in mining. And if you look at the energy transition and the transition towards more sustainable operations in mining, it is heavily reliant on technology being applied to centuries-old production methods. You know, at the end of the day, most mines, you have to dig a hole, you have to dig out some big stuff and make it and take big rocks and make them into small bits. This takes energy. This takes a lot of energy. And the way you do that is kind of fairly, you know, you are in a way, you are hemmed in by the physics of what you're doing. You know, if it takes a certain amount of energy to break a big rock into a small rock, that's a physical property. But how you do it, and by doing it smarter and finding new innovative technologies in applying the energy and also sourcing the energy, this really aids the energy transition. Now, mining companies are vastly different. If you take the top tier guys, Rio Tinto and BHP and Codelco and Anglo American, all of these companies are huge global conglomerates, and they have the capital and the means to be able to really invest heavily in finding alternative sources. I mean, Anglo American has just recently launched a haul truck that runs on a fuel cell, so that's zero emission, basically hydrogen powered haul truck. Now, if this is something that can be really exploited and taken further, I mean, that is a fundamental shift. This is only possible in really large operations where the capital burden on these kind of projects is able to be absorbed, But if you go to the other 90% of the mining industry, it's generally speaking much smaller operations, and for them to do a transition is really, really hard. And I think many of these companies are also trapped in areas where energy is not that abundant. They might not even be on an electrical grid, on an electrical grid. They might have to generate their own electricity, which in most cases, is reliant on dirty fuel oil diesel generator or fuel oil generators or diesel generators. So the ability for these companies to kind of adopt new renewable energy sources is tremendous, and we are seeing a huge uptake of these kind of alternative energy plants in smaller mining companies, and Rockwell plays a very integral part of that, because we certainly don't supply the machines, we don't supply the turbines, but our engineering teams and our systems integrators that are all over the world can certainly apply our control technologies and the software technologies we've got to all of these. The advantage of a company like Rockwell is we have a tremendous foot in other industries. So we can apply the lessons learned from, say, life sciences in terms of tracking and tracing and serialization, which doesn't seem applicable. But if you can start tracing where resources come from and where they go to, you can also start affecting the supply chains of people to actually make them more sustainable, because there are some rogue operators, and if you can eliminate those by having a better way of tracing where your lithium or your cobalt comes from, that's a good thing, But so applying lessons learned from other industries is really where the impact of a company like ours becomes very powerful. And we have quite often, and in my presentation, I will very briefly touch on some technologies applied in steel plants where the off gases are used to make ethanol, which is something you would expect in a CPG, in the food industry or something like that. But in minings and metal, you have many ways of limiting the output or your footprint of your carbon emissions. But I think we constantly have to give ourselves a reality check in mining. The basic fundamentals of mining have not changed. The need for the resources are increasing exponentially almost. The cost of getting the resources out is going up. The prices are going up, but not always the same. So the capital pressure on mining operations is constantly increasing. I think there's often an unrealistic expectations from investors and lawmakers to kind of just suddenly create these mines that do no harm. And I know we should do no harm, but there is a reality, there's a fundamental reality that means that we would have to look at ways of offsetting some of the carbon, but to really kind of pretend that we can go carbon neutral in a very short period of time and still produce the metals that are needed for the world, I think that's a half truth, in my opinion.
I see. Thank you here for your answer. You briefly touched upon what you're going to mention during your presentation, but would you be able to elaborate a bit more what to expect at your presentation? What else we can hear from it?
Over the last 10, 15 years, my passion has been to kind of promote the concept of what we now call the connected mine. And I think what this means is that mining operations are quite often split up in individual components. There's the open cast section, there's the transport section, there's the milling section, or whatever. You have all these different sections on a mine. And when you put those together and you start looking at the efficiencies that you can generate from doing that, it is astounding what positive benefits you can get from that. And I think in my mind, the biggest impact we can have on sustainability is always you go back to the basics, and you have to go and look at efficiency, you have to look at optimization, and you have to look at finding ways of doing your maintenance in a very predictable and efficient manner. Because by doing that, you reduce your impact by a very large amount. A lot of I sometimes call them shiny objects. A lot of people like to grab onto really interesting new technologies and stuff, but and those are important because progress is driven by the stargazers, but we mustn't forget that there's still a very basic reality that we have to not leave behind, because it's hard. Anybody that works on a mine that has to run a mine and run an operation in a remote area will tell you it's sometimes some of the toughest environments in the world to work in, and to do it efficiently is important, and that has a fundamental impact. And also by focusing on how efficient the operations are, we can reduce the kind of waste stream that comes out of the mining operations, and that impact alone, I think, often these kind of a small improvement in productivity definitely, I think, overshadows the shift to some some new future technology that hasn't really been proven yet, because you've got to do both. But if you forget about the basics, and I think I would like to explore this concept of connecting your mining operations in a really intelligent and smart way, and using it as a single organism, and then creating the true benefit that comes from it.
Great.
Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. We were really excited for that presentation, definitely. Hein, would you be able also to share your thoughts on what are the main challenges right now coming to the mining industry operators? What are the main challenges the mining industry facing nowadays? Of course, related to energy transition or movement to this zero emission production.
Yeah, as I've said, I think the main obstacles are that many of the mining operations are already struggling to find any kind of energy source. So I mean, you can imagine if you're running a gold mine in the middle of Central Africa, where there's no grid, there's no infrastructure, your options are severely curtailed. And I think it is incredible how some of these smaller operators that are operating in very remote areas, how they have embraced renewables, particularly photovoltaic or PV. The sun shines a lot out there. So I think the obstacles to many remote mining operations are just their remoteness, And then I think you get pressure from regulators and investors want to see rapid movement on it, but the response, the ability to respond, is often limited by the resources that are available. And this is kind of, I think, there's always been a problem in mining to find enough capital to do what you want to do. I mean, that's just a given. Nobody, mining has forever been the stepchild of the investment community. But so I think capital resources to be able to effect the changes that are required are probably in many cases the biggest obstacle. Regulatory pressures to do it are increasing, which is in a way a really positive thing. For a long time, there were regulatory obstacles, where mining companies desperately wanted to generate their own power, but they were not allowed to. And I think this is changing. The world is becoming more energy poverty in a global sense is certainly on the rise. So I think companies that can generate their own power are being welcomed rather than shunned as they were maybe a decade ago. So, I think it always comes back to money in some way or another. I think the resources to do all the stuff we want to do is that's I think always the biggest limitation.
Definitely. Thank you here for your opinion. Obviously, we will have on our event the panel discussion about collaboration needed between industries to promote the movement to zero emission operation. And we're excited for Rockwell Automation to be also part of the panel discussion. And definitely, we cannot wait for the event. Happened 9 and 10 of June in Stockholm, Sweden, to have this sharing of the thoughts and insights between mining operators and other companies to get to know what the industry future is holding for us. Yeah, thank you, Hein, for being with us here on this podcast and sharing your thoughts. Looking forward to see you in Stockholm.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.